Starting from our yesterday's discussion on peace studies, today Madiha, Hidayat, and myself will try to explain both peace and conflict. How can peace be created and then maintained, and how conflict can be avoided, or how these two terms are um, uh, related to each other, or how peace is dependent on conflict, because uh, throughout the world, if we see, almost 80% of all kind of human catastrophes are because of conflict. It is an inherent and unavoidable part of a society change. But the question then comes that how can we handle conflict, and influences, how conflict influences the effect and result of change. Then understanding how to handle, utilize, and convert conflict can help in development of more peaceful settlements and reactions. Here then comes the question uh, as to what peace is and how it can be accomplished. Because as far as peace is concerned, it is a hypothetical concept. It is sometimes easier to identify uh, what it is, what peace is not, or what it is not, or when peace is absent. That is to say that in a form of conflict or anywhere, the presence of conflict shows that there is absence of conflict. So conflict occurs when two or more individuals, groups, community pursue mutually incompatible aims, objectives, or they disagree with each other on one point, as defined by the Latin phrase to clash or engage in struggle. Mm, Saying that uh, not to agreeing with each other, or a struggle to get ahead of each other on some point or on any point that both the parties do not agree on. So, peace and war can take many forms and shapes. They can arise on a variety of levels and with a vast range of causes and results. Then also, peace and conflict can be found in a variety of settings that range from individual, within a family, in a school, and community, um, to uh, a state level, then regional level, as well as global level. And then there are certain causes or many causes that leads to violence or that can avoid violence. For example, poverty, violence and non-violence, individual and overall security, hunger, discrimination, um, or discriminating any group, human rights violation in case of war and justice, freedom, and the human community are among all the topics that are regularly explored while we study peace and conflict. Now, how to understand the concept of peace and uh, conflict? Uh, One of the pioneer of peace and conflict studies was Johann Gatlung. He presented interconnected models of conflict, violence, and peace, and the mm, um, image that I have shared with you presents his model of conflict, violence, and peace, which is in which he considers conflict as a dynamic process in which structure, attitudes, and behavior change and influence one another. So we can say that direct violence can be reduced by altering conflict behavior, that those um, uh, parties that disagree with each other that has resulted in a conflict between them, how to change the conflict behavior or the nature of that conflict. Then structural violence can be reduced by eliminating systematic contradictions, and then inequities and cultural violence can be reduced by altering attitudes. Now, here three main important, um, you know, points of reduction of violence are mentioned, that is the behavior of conflict, structural violence, that how it can be reduced by curbing systematic contradictions, and the attitude of the parties, changing the attitude of the parties that are part of any conflict. And these, in turn, are linked to broader peacekeeping, peace building, and peacemaking strategies. Now, there are two kinds of peace. One we may term as negative peace, the other is positive peace. And according to Gatlin, negative peace is defined as the absence of direct violence. On the other hand, positive peace is defined as the absence of all three forms of violence. Now, if you see the image that I had shared with you, this is Gatlung's model of conflict, violence, and peace, where conflict has, three dimensions. One is contradiction, then attitude of the participants or parties to the conflict, and then the behavior or conflict behavior. And as far as violence is concerned, that is structural violence, cultural violence, and direct violence. And peace or dimension of peace, according to this model, are peace building, peacemaking, and peacekeeping. Now, preventing, managing, and resolving conflict. It is very important to keep in mind that while conflict is an unavoidable aspect of life, violent conflict can be avoided. For example, if we say that from the interpersonal to global level, there are variety of definitions and types of violence. Violence within a family, violence um, by a group, youth or gang violence, violence at workplace, hate crimes and war, discussion of societal injustice, discrimination, marginalization may also be useful in understanding the nature of violence. violence can be avoided through managing and resolving or transforming conflict. Now, here one thing is very important that I would add is that uh, there are different strategies to end a conflict. Number one, or the first important thing is how to prevent a conflict, how to avoid a conflict to take place, whether it is within a family, bet- within a community, between two groups of a community, within a state, between different identities, within a region, between and among different states, and at global level. That how to prevent, not to let that situation to change into conflict. So that would mean that to uh, avoid conflict, to get engaged in a process that may help us not to take that uh, mm, uh, matter to change into transform into a conflict. Then how to manage that conflict, and the last phase comes when a conflict occurs, how to resolve that. And for that, again, there are different strategies used in peace and conflict studies that are explained by various experts and scholars in peace and conflict studies. Uh, Now, as I said, that violence can be avoided through managing and resolving or transforming conflict. Conflict escalation and de escalation have various facets, and some of the examples that we can have a discussion on are, for example, defining the stages of a conflict, that is, difference to reconciliation, uh, then response strategies as well as the skill and methods required to respond. For example, problem solving, preventative peacekeeping, decentralization of power, etc. Number three, conflict resolution strategies. For example, withdrawal, compromise, or yielding, etc. The disparities in positions, interest, and needs. Interests are often easier to resolve than positions, um, or jobs, etc. Intervention by a third party. And the third party can use a strategy of coerciveness or non coercive strategy, or in some cases the third party as a mediator can use both persuasive strategy as well as coercive strategy, and that is specifically in case of conflicts or issues between states and between powerful communities, where the mediator is someone that is more powerful than the parties engaged in a conflict. Then symmetrical versus asymmetrical conflicts. Different types of powers, which we can discuss later on, and non-violent ways of resistance, that again has been explained by many um, experts and scholars by presenting examples of communities which were able to resolve a conflict through non-violent means, um, even persons, individuals whose non-violent resistance led to resolution of a conflict. Then contemporary and indigenous conflict resolution and peace building methods. So these are some of the strategies that can be used to avoid conflict, on which we can have a discussion later on after we hear Madiha's view on the topic. Over to you, Madiha.